Hey everyone, happy May the 4th weekend. I may be a little bit late to the celebrations, but I think we're still in Star Wars month, which I suppose is a thing. We've had new merch, we've had a Fortnite update, a series of mostly rubbish Tales of the Empire shorts, there's been a re-release of The Phantom Menace, but the thing I want to talk about is the end of the final season of The Bad Batch. I've been a fan of The Bad Batch from the start. I think they're nice boys. I think it's a really cool time period, and seeing the clone story continue beyond the prequels is really interesting. I really love Omega as a character, and I think a lot of the character work in Season 2 was really fantastic, and it set up a really exciting third season. I was disappointed to learn that this season would be the last, but at the same time, I was glad the show was getting a proper ending and not just being cut short. So the question is, did Season 3 live up to my expectations? Did they drop the ball or knock it out of the park? The answer is somewhere in between, and I'd like to dive into why. I'll try not to spoil too much in this video because I know there are people who are kind of undecided on watching it until they hear a verdict on whether it's worth doing so or not, and I totally understand that. So yeah, I'm not going to give away too much. Obviously, if you want to go in knowing as little as possible, don't listen to this, but yeah, I'm not exactly going to be going, the bit where this happens is good, the bit where this happens is bad, partly because I think that's boring. The season got off to a fairly remarkable start. It was exciting, it was fast-paced, and got straight into some interesting stuff with its characters and concepts. I've always felt that the show's best two components were Omega and Crosshair, and due to their individual stories, they've spent most of the series separated, so pairing them up going into the beginning of the final season was an inspired decision that I really don't think disappointed. There was some stuff I wasn't so sure about. I made a whole video talking about my unease when it came to the Palpatine Rise of Skywalker Project Necromancer stuff, and that was a feeling that did persist throughout the series, but I think that the show is at least interested enough in Omega as a character to not have her be totally defined by this weird eugenicsy blood storyline that she now has going on. It also felt like those early stories were less interested in the remaining non-captured members of the Batch, Hunter and Wrecker, and to be honest, I wasn't very interested in their goings-on either, but I kind of understood that this was the price you pay for so much delicious crosshairing, and you know, there's a full season ahead, there'll be time for those characters later. But after the breakneck pace of the opening, the season never really slowed down, and I think that's where a lot of the problems start, because as much as people have been complaining over the years about how much filler there is in this show, I think the stuff that happened in those episodes was often the most important stuff of all. Taking the time to explore these characters in situations that were tailor-made to expose a particular element of their personality or their relationships is what gave the series the foundation, the building blocks, to deliver on those bigger emotional moments and story developments later on in the more important episodes. But this season had a kind of all-killer, no-filler approach that I think did it a real disservice. It kind of shifted the focus from story to plot, from a show that felt committed to unpacking its characters and their place in the galaxy, to a show about characters who need to go and get a thing so they can do a thing. That's pretty much the vibe I had for the second half of the season. It was all about the plot, it was all about what they needed to do and not really who they were. Even as things were happening that on paper should have felt important and impressive, there was something hollow about it all as we hurtled towards a conclusion with no sign of any last-minute development for these characters that deserved and needed it. You could say that the work done in the first two seasons was enough to carry over and inform the events of this one, and while I think that's true, it only goes so far. In a way, I was reminded of The Rise of Skywalker, because characters like Hunter and Wrecker, and to an extent Crosshair, it felt like they'd finished their arcs, and they were just kind of existing, floundering for most of this season, just doing these quests, but with nothing going on internally for them, really. They were just there. The good, juicy relationship and character stuff wasn't totally absent, but I felt like it took a back seat at a time where it really should have been more important than ever. You'd often get the hint of something great, you know, like we're on the verge of some tension building between some characters or, you know, an emotional breakthrough, and it would pretty much always get cut short, often by the appearance of some big creature to fight. That's something that happens all the fucking time in this show. Like, for some reason, it's afraid of ever fully sitting down and examining the choices that it's had its characters make, so it panickingly throws up an external force, you know, an external threat to take the focus away. I don't understand it. It's like, Does it think our attention spans are that bad? Does it think, maybe there are children watching that would be bored? I don't know, because it's just like it's pretty much every time you're like, oh, are we about to get something here that's like, well, hold that thought. And maybe they come back to it at the end of the episode, but it's always in less depth than it would have had if the original conversation hadn't been interrupted. It's almost like there's always a reason found for them not quite digging in as deep as they should. The dialogue remains uninspired. I don't think it's as egregious as the Jon Favreau Mandoverse shows, but I don't think it's much better either. I think the fact we don't have to see these lines come out of real live-action human faces probably does it a lot of favours. I think characters just kind of say things. They just spell things out in a way that's very plain and unambiguous and inhuman. There's not much nuance going on there. I said this when I spoke about Season 2, but this is what happens when you take a show aimed at children and over time you allow the subject matter to mature with its audience, and then you just keep going until you've got a show with all the storytelling styles of a Cartoon Network series, but aimed at people who watched that original series as children 16 years ago. It's a show that at times very much feels like it's for adults, but also can't stop behaving like it's aimed at the 8-year-olds its audience used to be. There are a lot of passionate Bad Batch fans out there, and I often feel like they have to do a lot of heavy lifting to assign a level of depth to the show that the series itself isn't interested in giving them, which I think is a shame because they're right to look for that kind of depth, because the characters and the situations do warrant it. So those are my story concerns, but I think even disregarding them and looking at the show for just its plots, taking it as just a series of things that happened, because a lot of things did happen, I still think there are problems. I think I wasn't happy with a lot of what was happening in the show. Not in a case of I disagreed with it, but in that there were so many unresolved plot threads from the first 2 seasons that going into this season I was kind of expecting to see readdressed or maybe even tied up nicely, as this is the final season of the show. But in place of resolutions to those ones, we just got more stuff. We just got piles and piles of more kind of plot threads that still weren't looking like they were going anywhere final towards the end of this season. It was like, okay, we're kind of nearing the end here, and instead of wrapping up stuff with Cody or stuff with stuff from the season 1 stuff, it's like, okay, no, we've just actually got more things to worry about. Okay, that's cool, that's all right. The stakes going into their final confrontation felt really repetitive. It didn't feel like we were nearing the end of anything. To me, it seemed like there must have been a season 4, that there must have been planned for future stories and future resolutions to these things, but they just had to scramble and turn a season finale into a series finale, and I thought that was a real shame. But then the finale came along, and it felt exciting and interesting and thoughtful and emotional and cathartic, and shockingly, most importantly, it felt final. They may have been partially running on the fumes of development from previous seasons, but those action, story, and character beats, they fucking hit, man. They just do. I think, despite all my reservations going into it, I came away from that episode feeling like I'd just witnessed a satisfying conclusion to so much of what this show and the Clone Wars has been doing. I'm continually impressed by the handling of Crosshair's story, showing a character's life continuing beyond his redemption. What a concept. I think, as much as I would have liked to have seen more of it under less frantic circumstances, seeing him get reintegrated with his squad and the galaxy, I think that's been really good. I feel like the show almost has a defiant attitude towards him. It's almost like he is doing the kind of the thing of, I've been bad, to truly get a redemption, I'm going to sacrifice myself, just let me die, just give up on me, that kind of thing. And the show is pushing back against that and saying, no, hang on, you have a place in this story still, you have a place in this squad, you have a place in the galaxy. And I think that's almost pushing back against the boring, lazy idea of you do bad things and then you decide to be good by killing yourself in a heroic way. No, you can just choose to be good by living your life as a good person. And I think it's great that the show is taking that kind of approach and not a different approach. This sentiment is often conveyed through Omega, who is just this beacon of all that is good in the galaxy. I think it makes me emotional seeing how wonderful she is and how much she has grown as a character, and how much, she's just properly a fighter, a leader. There's no question anymore that she's just part of this squad. She'll suggest charging into battle. This tiny girl with her gun, she's like, come on, we'll go through here, we'll sort that out. And the adults in her squad are not like, no, you stay here, it's not safe. They're like, all right, lead the way, Omega. I think it's amazing seeing that. And I think she is just, in this season, it feels more than ever, she's the moral heart of the group. And she's almost kind of the driving force for so much of what they do. And not in a case of, oh, we need to keep her safe, but she thinks we need to do this. And I suppose she's right. And yeah, that's just been wonderful to see. And I'm so happy with where this season took her. And the same goes for Echo. He's always been this representation of the normal clones, I suppose. And I loved the Clone Wars clones growing up. I mean, I even have this clone-themed Muppet. But Echo is a character I've been watching since I was 7 years old. And in The Bad Batch, I always felt a little disappointed at how superfluous he felt within the context of the squad. The decision they made in Season 2 to separate him from the rest of the batch was a really fantastic one, because I think it's turned him into something special. It made him feel more important than ever, because I think seeing him now is a treat. He's only there when it's really important for him to be there, and it's like, oh, I miss Echo a bit, and then a few episodes later you're like, oh great, it's Echo, that's brilliant. And it's nice seeing him reunite with the squad every now and then. And that's exciting, rather than just having him just kind of float around in the outskirts of the group for 10 episodes when he's not really needed. And I think you just kind of go, what is this guy here, really? He's not Tech, he's not Hunter, he's not quite anyone. He's just there. But I felt like his role in the finale was absolutely playing to all his strengths, and I was so glad to see that he was as vital as any of the other Bad Batch members, if not more so. He definitely had more to do than Wrecker, who's likeable, but he's just never been much of a character. And at this stage, I'm not disappointed by that. I think it's kind of what I've come to expect, but it's worth mentioning because this could have been the season where they gave us the Wrecker episode, the thing that made us all go, wow, I never thought much of him beyond the comic relief, but he's really got some depth to him that I didn't expect. But no, they just kind of keep him as silly and fun. And silly and fun's good. I like him. It's not like, oh god, Wrecker's on screen. It's just, I don't know, in a show about X number of characters, it would be nice if each of them had their moments to really shine. Hunter remained pretty stagnant from a development perspective this whole season, but in the finale I felt that they were able to make him feel like the main one again, or at least, I guess, remind us of why this used to be the Hunter show, while keeping up a pretty good balance of everyone. I think there's one scene in particular that draws on Hunter and all the best things that have worked about this character over the years, and I was really happy to see that in the show's last opportunity to do that, really, is to go, hey, you know what? This was the Hunter show, and it was right to be the Hunter show, and we still love Hunter. And I think, yeah, that was a nice surprise, even if the season left me wanting a little more from him. At the start of the finale, I was kind of annoyed that some characters were so separate from the main action, but as it progressed, I kind of appreciated how cleverly it was structured. I think it meant the episode was split into phases, meaning that each individual element was able to take center stage at different times before all coming together for a big proper climax. Teehee. Speaking of juvenile humour, I'm glad the show wasn't afraid of a happy ending. I'm not going to give too much away, and it's not all rainbows and sunshine, but I think it largely avoided a lot of the lazier possibilities that I've seen suggested for this show since it started, and it did a lot of the stuff that I was really hoping for, especially the final scene, which, as I was watching it, I was trying to will the show to do it, and yeah, I was really happy with the scene we ended up with. As for all those plot threads that I said didn't feel like they were nearing a resolution, some of them actually did get wrapped up quite nicely. The others, and I know this is going to sound like I'm making excuses, I don't know that they need to be resolved in a show about the Bad Batch. A lot of these threads were introduced in episodes that didn't even have the Bad Batch in them. At most, they've been Bad Batch adjacent, but they can absolutely continue to be explored and resolved without this show and without these characters. I guess the question then is, where do you explore these things? Because I've seen people say, oh, maybe the next show they'll do will be about the clones, and it's like, we've kind of just had 2 shows about the clones. We've had the Clone Wars leading into the Clone Bad Batch, and then going, oh, Rex and Cody spin-off. That, to me, doesn't seem like a great idea, but at the same time, I'd like to see these stories told, so it's a difficult one. I suppose that's a question for another day. Maybe these threads can just hang for another few years until someone wants to come along and answer them. I think, ideally, the next thing we get from Star Wars animation is something completely new. But I know the argument, the ideal thing is that a show like The Bad Batch finishes everything it starts, but if they only had 1 season left, the decision to prioritize giving its characters a definitive, closure-filled ending, that, to me, is something I can admire. There's so much I admire about this season overall, and I think I've probably come across as quite down on it in this video, but I don't know, as much as the overarching story stuff left a lot to be desired, each individual episode was something I found pretty enjoyable, and I think it's got a good vibe. It's exciting. It's good to watch. It's fun. It's funny. I think the visuals are always really good. The music by the Kiners is better than it's ever been. I've been critical here because I expect a lot from this show, and I know it has the potential. I think as a season, this wasn't as strong as Season 2, but I think it was stronger than Season 1. The highs of Season 3 are a real triumph, and I think having an ending that is satisfying and hopeful and not just massively disappointing and depressing, that's a major success when it comes to Star Wars. So I really like The Bad Batch. I've enjoyed it being the Star Wars animation over the last few years. I've enjoyed discussing it with my pals. For my friend Yasmin, this is her Star Wars. This is her thing. Loads of people have connected to this show on a really deep level, and I can see why. I obviously have concerns and questions about where we go from here, but for now I am happy to celebrate these wonderful characters and the team that brought them to life. The team led by Jennifer Corbett and Brad Rau, and not the cowboy hat wearing producer that people are determined to give all the credit. But I'd love to know what you think of this season of The Bad Batch and the show as a whole. Did it just keep getting better and better? Has it really declined in quality? Have you always loved the show? Have you just started to love the show? Have you never cared for this show? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I make videos on all kinds of things these days. I'm going to be talking about The Acolyte when that finishes, the Star Wars Outlaws video game when that's done. In the next 8 weeks, I'm going to be talking about the new season of Doctor Who. I understand that not everyone is as excited about that as I am, so if you don't want to see those videos, just imagine I'm taking a 2-month break. I wish I was taking a 2-month break, but after that I promise that the regularly scheduled, eclectic programming will return. I'll see you soon. Love you lots.